I'm John Beadle, co-founder and managing partner of Aegis Ventures. Welcome to Consortium Conversations, where we introduce you to the health system leaders at the forefront of health tech innovation. Combined, our digital consortium partners deliver care to tens of millions of people annually and serve as a critical implementation sandbox for new technologies with the potential to dramatically improve the experience of healthcare for patients and caregivers. These are the frontline stories of the innovators whose decisions impact countless American lives every single day. Welcome to the latest installment of Consortium Conversations. I'm your host, John Beadle, co-founder and managing partner of Aegis Ventures. I'm thrilled to be joined by the newest partner at Aegis, Murray Brozinsky. Murray recently joined Aegis and will be leading our venture creation activities and working across the portfolio. He joins us after a really distinguished career, leading, launching, and exiting a number of very successful health technology companies. Murray, welcome to the series.
Thrilled to be here, John. Thank you.
Tell us more about your background, Murray. What led you into healthcare and what brings you to Aegis today?
Yeah, so I've been an entrepreneur for a long time and helping to run small businesses, large businesses. And I was running a business a number of years ago that was a pioneer in loyalty and reward programs. So we were working with a lot of commerce companies and financial service companies. And it was great. It was going great. We were applying the latest technology, a lot of data-driven theses. And in that process, my wife was unfortunately diagnosed with breast cancer. Like many of us, we ran into all the difficulties of the health system, and we were lucky. We had great access. But I said to myself, if I ever had the opportunity to get involved with a company and do what I was doing with technology and data, my thesis looking back at my own life is using technology and data to improve lives. But if I ever had the opportunity to do it in healthcare, which is the most important aspect of our lives, I would do that. And so I put that in the back of my head. And years later, when I had that opportunity, that's what got me into the industry.
So you've been a friend of Aegis for many years, an advisor across our portfolio, but recently decided to join as a partner. I know you are in very high demand from a lot of different companies for CEO roles, venture capital firms for partner roles. What made you finally decide to join Aegis, and what makes you most excited about everything that we're doing?
Yeah, I was a fan from day one, so you have me at hello. But I really liked your leadership. I really liked the thesis. So the way I looked at Aegis was, we're going to build the next generation of health companies, but we're going to do it with the people who know the problems best. So let's get very close to health systems and have these companies be health system driven. It's exactly the way that we built Conversa, my last company. And to do that systemically with a number of health systems, to build a number of new companies, especially in this, time of AI, just a unique opportunity. And I thought what I could bring to the table, having now built a number of companies and run those companies, is really advise the next generation of CEOs and founding teams that'll be leading the company. So for me, it was a really attractive opportunity. And then at the end of the day, it comes down to people, and from you to the rest of the folks involved in Aegis is super attractive.
You're one of the rare people who I think has had a string of pretty uninterrupted success. 3 successful companies launched, 3 successful exits. What are the biggest learnings from you in building and scaling those companies that you think we can apply to the next generation of companies that we launch?
Yeah, I like to say that I was brilliant, but I made all the mistakes you could make. And we had a little bit of serendipity, but I'll tell you what I think, if I look back thematically, that is super important. And I would attribute it to the success of all of those companies. Falling in love with the problem, not the solution. Most people come up with a problem they want to solve, they build a solution, and then that crystallizes, and you are really, really tied to that solution. And at the end of the day, when you start a company, the one thing I can tell you immutably is you're going to be wrong. And the question is, what are you going to be wrong about? And then how quickly can you fix it? And so if you fall in love with the problem, not the solution, you have the opportunity to continually improve that solution over time. You drop things that aren't working, you can double down on things that are working. So that's certainly one. The other is, and related, but strong opinions weakly held. So have very, very strong conviction, but be very open to changing it very quickly when new information comes to bear. So you can update your perspectives on market, on people, on product. And I think we did that very well. And then the third, and there was a recent paper you and I both read from Paul Graham on founder-driven leadership. I'm a huge fan of founder-driven leadership, but you have to marry it with giving people agency. And if you get the best people and you get very, very clear on what the vision is, you give them agency, and then the role of the founder and the leader of these companies is more like a conductor of an orchestra, and you need the best people in each of those seats. You can hear what the piece should sound like in your head, and all you're doing is making sure you're constantly moving those people around and giving direction so that what you actually hear is what you hear in your head.
So I think one of the things that really resonated when you and I were first having discussions about you joining was the extent to which we're both very thesis-driven in the way that we like to build companies. And you and I have been working on the latest set of investment theses and company creation theses that the next set of portfolio companies across Aegis will be built around. Can you share a little bit more about those theses and how you think about forming theses generally as you're building companies?
Yeah, and I think this is one of the most important collaborations you and I have had. So I think it's a combination of, what are the unsolved problems in healthcare? Like, how do you envision what it should look like in the future? And then you look back and you say, how do we need to get there? And so we've got 5 theses, as you well know. One of them is really reimagining, how patients are going to experience care. And that was the thesis really that drove Conversa. And so that one I'm very partial to, but there's a huge, things crystallize, right? I mean, so why in this country do we deliver care through employers? So it happened through something in the past and it crystallized. And so the fact that we think about, this infrastructure called the hospital, and that's where most care is delivered, is changing. We all know the care of the future is going to be in the home. So how does it get from here to there? Lots of different things have to happen. And so we have a whole thesis around many companies can be built and how you reimagine that whole process of how care is delivered in the future. In order to be able to focus on that, we have a whole other thesis around how do you automate all of these workflows in healthcare that really, it's $4 trillion industry, probably $1 trillion of it is wasted according to most estimates. So how do you start to automate those processes? And so understanding them deeply and know where you can automate, where you can't, where you need to augment people, that's a whole nother thesis. And again, that could support probably tens of companies that we're looking at. I think another one that's super interesting is how do you amplify markers? So how do you amplify vital signs, and how do you potentially invent new vital signs? And so you can use technology today to amplify the ability to take, retinal imaging, for example, and be able to use AI to understand markers well in advance, identify markers that aren't being used as well as they could be today for eye disease, but also systemic, chronic diseases. Then on top of that, you can actually now use technologies that listen to your voice or look at your facial expressions, and it can potentially diagnose years in advance your, proclivity to get a disease. It can diagnose actual disease, and then equally important, it can monitor the progression of those diseases. So those are 3 of the theses. We've got another one that's really, how do you help health systems increase the share of care that they deliver and that they capture? So there are things that are, when you talk about healthcare, you talk about sort of the continuity of care. How do you get that experience all the way from, the hospital to the home and back again until, for example, the patient recovers or the patient is able to get their disease under control? And the more that the trusted party can grab of that process, the more value they're delivering to the patient, and of course, the more value economically they're capturing for themselves. So we have a whole thesis in that area, how we build companies to help health systems do that. And the 5th is really helping health systems unlock real world data. And the value of that is all this unbelievable data that's locked up in health systems, and most of it is underutilized. And if you look at what's happening in life science and now AI and pharmaceutical companies, there's a movement from controlled trials, which are laborious, they're super expensive, and it takes a really long time for treatments to get from development out to the world to treat patients. And unfortunately, the way they're done, we know they reliably work for the people that were in the trial, but it doesn't necessarily represent the population, which is what's causing a lot of inequity in care delivery. And so the ability to start to tap into real world evidence, all this data that sits in the health systems, to look at how is a treatment going to work on people, but I can run it across millions of people in real time and then know what might work for an individual patient, is a game changer. So we have a whole set of theses around how do we get that data from where it is and being underutilized to where it needs to be used to improve care.
So one of the things we both hear frequently as we're meeting with our digital consortium partners around the country is the extent to which they both need new solutions to solve problems, but they're also inundated with just a number of companies out there and the number of point solutions they need to deal with across their overall stack of solutions. As you look at how we're creating companies within Aegis and the Aegis ecosystem generally, how do you think we can build synergy across the portfolio and try to position ourselves as that wraparound transformation partner and revenue diversification partner that the systems we're working with are looking for.
You brought up the digital consortium. The fact that we've developed relationships with, close to a dozen health systems, and the value that they see is I get to work with this innovative company who's going to understand my agenda, understand my plan, and then going to help me get there. And so the portfolio, they're thinking of Aegis as a platform, and then Aegis is building companies, as you well know. Each of them actually are platforms. The only way to sell a platform, though, is to solve a very specific problem with a solution that the platform can deliver, and then you expand from there. So I think we have multiple value propositions to health systems. One, they look at us themselves ultimately as an Aegis shop. So I'm going to go to Aegis to solve particular problems. They're going to bring me solutions. Each solution in and of itself is a platform that I can plug in somewhere and then I can propagate. And then on top of it, which is what you're getting at, because we know that's what we're doing, each of the companies that we are co-creating, we're building them on chassis that allow them to interoperate. And so it's a platform that can together integrate with other platforms, and those platforms can integrate with all the legacy systems. And part of that is the fact that everything we do is AI first. And so if you're starting companies in this age, you have that ability to basically sort of obviate the need for interoperability that kind of dogged all of these earlier companies.
So we talk a lot about revenue diversification with all of our partners. Health systems are obviously very asset rich and capability rich, but at the same time, they're constrained by geography, by lack of entrepreneurial talent, by the fact that they're nonprofits that are serving important missions. There's a lot of limiting factors, but at the same time, we see extraordinary innovation, extraordinary opportunity to take what's been developed in those health systems and help them bring them outside of the system, pursue this model of outside-in innovation that can enable them to not only solve a core business problem, but also drive new sources of margin and new sources of revenue. How do you think about how we at the Aegis level can open up health systems, one, to national scale, but two, to some of the higher margin value pools, software, life sciences, payers, med tech, et cetera, and what role Aegis can play in convening that overall ecosystem?
I think you hit it on the head. In this world, I don't think there's any organization that's a better place than health systems. They have the patients, they have the data, they understand the workflows, they have deep domain knowledge and empathetic staff, and they also have, probably the most important thing is trust. They're the most trusted organization. So if you take all of those assets and now you look at this moment in time where the playing field, in my view, has been leveled, right? So they've been beleaguered for the last 20 years from big retail, big tech, private equity, well-funded venture-backed companies that are trying to get into this 20% of our GDP of healthcare. And now AI comes out and basically says, everybody's going to have access to these large language models, right? So I think the trick now, what Aegis' role is we're going to move into the whole era of applied AI. The AI is there now. It's how do you apply it to workflows, to data, to patients, and leverage the trust. And we have the experience with all the people that you've brought around the table who understand how to innovate businesses around that sort of unique situation, and how to innovate and apply AI and these other adjacent technologies to do that. And the health systems are sitting there on these very rich assets. So to your point, how do you get them, first of all, to use what the assets they have to shore up their own core businesses? We can increase margins substantially, but then how do you tap into these other very rich pools that are looking for these assets, like we talked about before, with life science trying to get this real world data to drive their transition to real world evidence?
So how much of what you're describing is doable today and is low-hanging fruit, things that you think health system executives should be pursuing now because it can drive such impact, versus technology that still needs to be refined and developed and implemented in the future?
Such a great question. So I think the right strategy for anybody building health tech companies, and I know we're pursuing at Aegis, is conceive of what start from the end, right? So you're writing the press release about what the health system of the future looks like, but that's the aspiration. And you want to start putting platforms in place today that are flexible enough to get to the end. But the impetus for putting it in today is it needs to be able to do the heavy work and solve a real problem. So that's the land and expand, which is very well-defined, acute problem today. So for example, in Ascertain's case, being able to really help solve prior authorization, right? It's a huge problem. It involves lots of intricacies. Being able to, though, not build a monolithic solution that's going to break when rules change and when systems change and when the submission for prior authorizations change, but being able to develop autonomous independent agents that do each of those things knit them together to solve the problem. It's flexible, it's dynamic. When rules change, when people change, it changes. But then you put it in place, and it's all being delivered by a platform that can reconfigure those same agents to tackle a different workflow. And then you can develop new agents on top of those core agents to go after more and more workflow. And again, in harmony with augmenting, being an ally of the workforce. So I think there's a lot that can be done today, but once you start putting it in and you start using it and working with it, you see the potential of where else it could go.
So as you look at the landscape of new technologies being developed, many of which are being concurrently pursued by hyperscalers, EHR companies, large-scale tech companies, and startups, where do you think startups have a right to win?
Really understanding the ecosystem where, there are a lot of startups that build companies that's very clear. It's really not a company in the future, but a product and even a feature, right, of these other companies like Epic that are naturally expanding. So you have to look at sort of what's the natural habitat of Epic, where there are natural expansions. So I think where to think about where those gaps are is where there's interactions across systems. So for example, back to prior authorization, if you're trying to do prior authorization for health systems, that's critical and there's a huge market to do that. If you're looking for prior authorizations at health plans, that's critical, there's a big market to do that. If you could actually develop a platform that enables them to interact together and you actually address the real problem, which is between the two, then you have a winner. That's very difficult if you are an EHR, right? Because you're basically the record for health systems. Plans have their own sort of ecosystem. So that's just one example of a startup. And the startup, by the way, in that case, could scale super quickly and become an enormous company.
Yeah, I mean, there's always a tension, as you and I talk about, between health systems not wanting point solutions, but also wanting the best possible solution for any given problem, and which is often difficult for founders to think about because everyone wants to build a platform, but there's also trade-offs with platforms in that you can't pursue each discrete opportunity with the same level of precision as a company that only does X. And so as you're advising founders that are building companies, how do you think you grapple with that tension?
Yeah, there are certain tensions where I feel you have to solve, right? So here's a blueprint for solving it. And then there are some where the winner learns how to manage the tensions. A lot of things determine success, but if I were going to over-index on one thing, I think we did well at Conversa, for example. If you want to drive outcomes, you want to put everyone on an evidence-based pathway because then you have enormous predictive power and you're going to get the outcome. That's one size fits all. No one will do it. So if you want to get people to do things and get them engaged, it's all about personalization. So you want to increase variability of personalization. You want to reduce variability of care. Those things are in tension. What I told the company over and over again is that tension exists. We're never going to solve it. If we manage it better than anybody else, we will win. And we figured out that was a tension. It was the most important one to manage, and that's what we did. So we had these personalized experiences, but we were able to, very high conviction, predict and then deliver outcomes. So back to your question, it's an interesting application of the 80-20 rule. I think you have to go in with a platform vision, pick off the initial use cases, 20% of what you're going to deliver, and you have to outperform the point solution. You have to be better. But then once you're in there, and there are other opportunities, you become, I'll use Ascertain as the example, you become an Ascertain shop. And when a new use case comes up, then the partner, the health system, is going to say, okay, I've got all these point solutions and I have my platform Ascertain. They only have to perform at parity at that point.
So we've spoken a lot today about the core requirements for building successful businesses, the challenges the healthcare industry is facing, the extraordinary opportunity that's been brought forth by generative AI and all the advancements we've seen in technology. As you think about synthesizing all of those core pieces of the environment and the moment that we're in, what's your vision for where healthcare can go and what's required of all the different core constituencies in the community to be able to achieve that vision?
Yeah, that's the ultimate question. I think there's the is world and the should be world, which is what you're asking. So we live in the is world and we have to define what it should be, otherwise we can't get there. So I think, here's the way I think of healthcare today, with more than $100 billion the last 5 years of venture money going in with COVID, with the financial crunch. We still have this crazy system where we're spending 20% of GDP getting really terrible outcomes. And the reason is we don't really have a healthcare system. We have a sick care system, right? So I think it needs to work from being reactive to being proactive. And I think all of these technologies will allow us to identify who isn't sick today but will become sick. Who's sick today but it hasn't yet progressed. So how do we intervene earlier? How do we get, like, all the back office stuff we're talking about and all the workflows are in service of doing things in real time? and also taking all the resources that are going there and focusing it into early diagnostics, earlier intervention. And if we do that, then we can, one, keep people healthier. So I think at the end of the day, we talk about health care. I think it's actually, we want to make care the smaller piece and health the bigger piece. If we keep people healthier longer, there's less care required. And then I think you can move that care to where the patients naturally want to be cared for, which is in the home. So I think ultimately it's more proactive care, pushing out of this artificial, where we started this frozen accident of the health system to making it the home system, the home health system. So I think those are two areas. I think to do that, there's a lot we can do, as we talked about with technology. It'll take us a long way. And then I think we also need policies to change so that we have alignment and we move to a real value-based healthcare system.
This has been a really fascinating discussion. Before we finish up, one of the things that I found most interesting about you when we met all those years back is that you're a very successful playwright in your own spare time. As you look at your experiences as a playwright and your entrepreneurial experiences, are there any parallels you can draw across the two?
Yeah, I actually wouldn't think so, but actually I think there are a number. So one, I always think of myself, and I think of entrepreneurs and founders as more creative people than business people, right? So there's some burning idea, some passion, and they want to get it manifest in the world. And they built a company. And some of those ideas should be sculptures and some should be plays. And so I think of the creation as very similar, creating a business and creating, for example, a play. Also, the more I thought about it, if you write, and my plays started with short stories and I turned them into plays. And the interesting learning for me was the short story, you control everything. You're kind of the god of the universe. With a play, you hand it over to a producer, a director, actors, which is very similar to a company. You have an idea, and as soon as you turn it into a company, you no longer have complete control over that idea. Right? It needs to deliver value to customers. You have employees that are, that are participating, and you become part of the creation, not the godlike creator. And then I think the third thing is writing a play is all about telling a story. When you're running a business, it's all about telling a story. And the story is changing, and the story needs to come out of all sorts of different people's mouths, your customers, your competitors, your employees. And that's very similar to writing for characters. What do you want them to say? And how are people going to hear what different characters say so they can get the whole story of the company?
Murray, this has been such a great discussion. Thanks so much.
John, first of all, thank you for the discussion, and thank you for creating Aegis. I'm really, really thrilled to be here.
I'm thrilled to have you as a partner.